One morning in late June, breaking news suddenly flooded economic bulletins. Coca-Cola had announced quarterly profits that far exceeded analysts' expectations. At first glance, it seemed like a positive sign, a testament to the enduring strength of a brand that's been part of American life for over a century. But within minutes, that wave of optimism was crushed by a shocking revelation. CEO James Quincy admitted that Coca-Cola might have to ramp up plastic bottle production as the cost of their iconic red aluminum cans had become prohibitively expensive. The reason wasn't internal mismanagement, it stemmed from a high-level political decision. On June 4, 2025, President Donald Trump officially signed an executive order doubling import tariffs on steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%. That number might seem dry on paper, but for the beverage industry, it hit like an earthquake. Coca-Cola, long associated with those classic red aluminum cans recognized worldwide, now faced an unprecedented challenge. The very packaging that helped the soul of its product had suddenly become a financial burden. In that moment, many began to ask, can an iconic brand that survived wars and recessions withstand this tariff storm? Or will American consumers soon have to grow accustomed to seeing Coca-Cola in clear plastic bottles, stripped of some of its classic allure? This seismic shift didn't just shake the foundations of Coca-Cola, it sounded a loud alarm across the entire U.S. food and beverage industry. But to fully grasp the severity of this shock, we have to look deeper. Why has aluminum, seemingly such a common material, become Coca-Cola's Achilles heel? The answer lies in a vast and complex supply chain, one that few have ever truly imagined. To most people, aluminum is just the shiny shell of a Coca-Cola can, something they pop open, drink, and toss away in a matter of minutes. But behind that shell lies a long and intricate story about the global supply chain, about dependency and limitations that even a giant like Coca-Cola can't easily overcome. Despite being an industrial powerhouse, the US simply can't produce aluminum at the massive scale it needs. Over half of the aluminum used in domestic manufacturing has to be imported, most of it from Canada, a longtime neighbor and trade partner. In 2024 alone, aluminum imports surpassed 5 million tons, a stark reflection of that unavoidable reliance. The issue is that even a small increase in input costs can trigger a devastating ripple effect. For Coca-Cola, if each can costs just a few cents more to make, multiply that by the billions of cans produced and consumed each year, and suddenly you're staring at a massive number. That difference doesn't just threaten profits, it directly impacts the company's ability to maintain stable retail prices. And in the fast-moving consumer goods industry, every cent counts. A minor price hike can be enough to sway customer loyalty. It's no coincidence that CEO James Quincy issued a warning. The cost isn't just in profits, it's in stifled economic growth. Behind that statement lies a serious concern. Coca-Cola may be forced to choose between sacrificing profits or losing ground in the market. This dependency has turned aluminum into Coca-Cola's true Achilles heel. A brand that once seemed untouchable, a symbol of strength, is now trembling in the face of market shocks tied to a seemingly lifeless metal. And as Coca-Cola scrambles to navigate a new path forward, the fallout from this tariff storm doesn't stop with them. The shockwaves have spread rapidly, sweeping across the broader beverage and canned food industries, sectors where aluminum isn't just packaging, but a vital lifeline. In the days following the announcement of the new tariff, it wasn't just Coca-Cola sounding the alarm. Industry associations across the board began to speak out. The Can Manufacturers Institute, the Aluminum Association, and dozens of other organizations urgently petitioned Washington, warning that the 50% tariff was doing nothing to jumpstart domestic production as hoped. Instead, it was tightening supply and driving up costs in a way many called irrational. The U.S. aluminum industry couldn't scale up overnight, while demand for packaging remained as high as ever. That mismatch acted like a sudden crack in the foundation of the entire system, spreading fast and threatening the already fragile stability of countless businesses. From beverage companies to canned food manufacturers, the blow was felt across the board. Campbell Soup, Hormel Foods, household names long tied to the canned soups and meats Americans grew up with, were now grappling with soaring costs just like Coca-Cola. If a single soda can now cost a few extra cents, so too did every can of soup or meat. And when millions, even hundreds of millions of products rise in price, an entire industry begins to stagger. Analysts have called it an undercurrent, not loud, not violent at first, but gradually seeping into every link of the supply chain, from factory floors to warehouses, and finally to supermarket shelves. Consumers, used to price stability, were starting to feel the difference with every shopping bill. In this climate, Coca-Cola couldn't afford to sit still. The company understood that simply complaining or waiting for policy reversals could cost them their edge. And so, in the midst of a pricing storm and a chain reaction with no clear end, Coca-Cola was forced to adapt, exploring new paths from maximizing the use of recycled aluminum to more controversial moves, returning to plastic bottles or even experimenting with glass. These solutions may not be perfect, but they represent the survival route Coca-Cola must take to keep the heart of its beverage empire beating. Under the heavy pressure of soaring aluminum costs, Coca-Cola began a scramble for solutions, one that the company knew from the start would be riddled with contradictions and controversy. At first, the simplest fix was to make greater use of recycled aluminum. For a corporation used to operating on a global scale, ramping up recycling efforts not only reduced dependence on imports, but also helped cut some costs. Every aluminum can collected and remade might have just a few grams of raw material, but when multiplied across billions of units, those savings became enormous. Still, recycled aluminum could only meet a small portion of the need, while Coca-Cola's packaging demands remained virtually endless. That's why the company had to innovate, even in the tiniest of details. Design engineers were tasked with finding every possible way to conserve material. Thinner cans, smaller lids, even re-engineering the can's body structure to be durable yet lightweight. These tweaks might sound trivial, but they were proof of the urgency and intensity driving a brand now racing against time. And yet, even those efforts weren't enough to plug the gap left by the new tariffs. Eventually, Coca-Cola was forced to make a shocking decision: to increase production of PET plastic bottles. Plastic wasn't hit by the same tariffs. It was easy to produce, easy to transport, and cheaper than aluminum. What's more, Coca-Cola already had dual production lines for both cans and bottles, so the shift could happen quickly. In some markets, the company even began testing a return to refillable glass bottles, a nostalgic throwback to an era long past, now seen as a potential alternative path. However, every shift came with its own set of challenges. Plastic bottles required a massive supply of caps, labels, and bottle-grade plastic. The logistics chain had to be restructured to adapt, and not every country had a robust collection or recycling system in place. What looked like a short-term advantage could easily turn into a long-term liability. But amid a storm of tariffs, Coca-Cola was running out of options. This was a pragmatic move, sacrificing some of its iconic image to keep production running and protect its global market share. But that pragmatism also flung open the door to fierce public backlash. Coca-Cola has long faced criticism as the world's largest producer of plastic waste, and when the company publicly confirmed plans to ramp up PET bottle production, public outcry was swift. Was Coca-Cola choosing the easy way out, sacrificing the environment just to protect profits? This was no longer just an economic calculation. It had become a test of trust, of brand integrity, and of the social responsibility that Coca-Cola must now confront in the next chapter of this crisis. Coca-Cola has long been synonymous with the iconic red shimmer of aluminum cans, packaging that's more than just a container, but a piece of pop culture. People often joke, Coke always tastes better in a can than in a plastic bottle, a lighthearted remark that actually reveals a deeper emotional bond shared by millions of consumers. But now, as Coca-Cola is forced to pivot back to PET plastic bottles to cut costs, that image has started to waver. To many loyal fans, the move feels like a betrayal of the brand's heritage, a trade-off made too easily under financial pressure. Ironically, Coca-Cola has already faced global criticism for being dubbed the world's largest plastic polluter. Over the past several years, the company has poured billions into recycling programs and pledged to create a world without waste by 2030. And yet, increasing its reliance on plastic bottles now feels like a step backward, prompting the public to question whether those environmental commitments were genuine or merely a polished PR front. Environmental organizations were quick to respond, calling Coca-Cola's decision a textbook example of corporate profit taking precedence over the planet. Worse still, the branding issue runs deeper than a mere change in materials. It touches on habits, emotions, and memories. A cold can of Coke cracked open at a Christmas party or during a summer soccer game, that's a moment etched into the collective memory of generations. Swap the can for a plastic bottle, and while the taste may remain, the experience undeniably changes. And sometimes it's that very feeling that fuels brand loyalty more than anything else. To calm the backlash, Coca-Cola has had to publicly reaffirm that this is only a temporary response to the tariff crisis, while doubling down on promises to invest in recycling and sustainable packaging innovation. But there's always a fragile gap between promises and practice, where even a small misstep could snowball into a full-blown PR disaster. That's the double-edged sword Coca-Cola now holds, saving costs in the short term but risking long-term trust. And once trust begins to fracture, it often carries painful consequences for sales. That's when Coca-Cola must grapple with another tough equation, adjusting pricing and supporting its distribution network in a way that preserves profits without alienating the very consumers who built the brand in the first place. Pricing has always been a delicate tightrope in the beverage industry. Consumers might accept that a can of Coca-Cola costs more than a fast food meal, but they're far less forgiving when their familiar soft drink suddenly becomes more expensive due to a political decision. In fact, Coca-Cola already had to raise prices once back in 2018 because of tariffs on steel and aluminum, and the market's reaction at the time offered some hard lessons. Now, faced with a jarring 50% tariff, Coca-Cola's leadership must tread more carefully than ever, raise prices too quickly and risk losing customers, hold prices steady, and watch profits erode day by day. The strategy they've chosen is a form of stealth price increase, not a sudden, across-the-board hike, but a gradual adjustment, tailored by region and by product. A can of Coke might only go up a few cents, but the change happens slowly, like subtly, just enough that most consumers won't notice a dramatic difference. But behind that pricing strategy lies a far more complex machine, the franchise bottlers. The companies licensed to bottle and distribute Coca-Cola products are the ones who feel the pressure most directly. They are the arms and legs that deliver Coke to every shop, every diner, every supermarket. As can prices, transport costs, and ingredient expenses all rise, these partners bear the brunt. And if they don't get timely support, the entire distribution chain could begin to fracture. That risk becomes even sharper in a market where Pepsi is always waiting to pounce. If Coca-Cola pushes prices beyond what consumers are willing to tolerate, many won't hesitate to switch to Pepsi or cheaper alternatives. This is a battle not just for brand loyalty, but for the wallets of increasingly cost-conscious customers. That's why Coca-Cola has had to roll out promotional deals, incentives for distributors, and continuous support to keep the global network intact. Still, no matter how nimble Coca-Cola becomes, the company knows that the real root of the problem isn't in distribution. It's in the crushing weight of the tariff policy that's squeezing the entire industry. And to untie that knot, Coca-Cola needs more than pricing strategies or marketing campaigns. It must now step into a far more brutal arena, the high-stakes game of lobbying and trade politics in the heart of Washington, D.C. When cost-cutting efforts and subtle price adjustments proved to be just a drop in the bucket, Coca-Cola was left with no choice but to take a path long familiar to corporate giants: lobbying. In the corridors of Congress and offices across Washington, Coca-Cola's representatives, alongside a coalition of industry associations, launched an aggressive campaign to persuade the administration to exempt aluminum imports from Canada, the US's most stable and reliable supplier. Their argument was clear. Aluminum isn't just about soda cans. It's a strategic material essential to aviation, the automotive sector, and even national defense. Slapping excessive tariffs on it was, in their view, tantamount to weakening the very value chains America depends on. But under President Donald Trump, the White House stood firm with a hardline stance. Tariffs weren't merely about economics. They were a matter of national security. That framing made lobbying efforts far more precarious. In the high-stakes arena of political messaging, even the interests of a global giant like Coca-Cola struggle to compete with the sweeping narrative of protecting industrial independence for American voters. Canada and the European Union, naturally, didn't sit quietly. Warnings of retaliatory trade measures began to circulate, threatening to push diplomatic relations into a fresh cycle of tension. Coca-Cola, along with countless other companies, suddenly found itself a hostage in a geopolitical chess game, where every move carried consequences far beyond the fate of a single soda can. This harsh reality revealed that Coca-Cola's challenges weren't just about quarterly earnings or balance sheets, but about far-reaching consequences on multiple levels. When costs rise and policies remain unchanged, the burden inevitably falls on everyday people, factory workers, families who rely on the beverage industry, and the very image of an America once proud of its consumer prosperity. At this point, Coca-Cola's story transcends the boundaries of corporate strategy and becomes a mirror reflecting the long-term toll of a trade war on jobs, on public trust, and on the nation's identity itself. A can of Coca-Cola, small and unassuming, has become a vessel for exposing the full weight of an economy caught in a political storm. Because Coca-Cola isn't just a brand, it's an enormous ecosystem supporting tens of thousands of factory workers, an expansive distribution network, and, indirectly, the livelihoods of countless families. When costs surge, that pressure inevitably bears down on those at the lowest rungs. Job cuts, halted investments, scaled back production. These aren't distant possibilities, but real scenarios that carry cracks in the foundation of social trust. From aluminum recycling plants to bottling factories all the way to supermarket shelves, the domino effect of the tariff war is unmistakable. Workers fear layoffs, retailers worry about declining consumer spending, and customers grow frustrated as everyday staples become more expensive. That frustration isn't directed solely at Coca-Cola. It spills over into a broader skepticism about the government's economic policies. When an iconic brand gets backed into a corner, it becomes a reflection of a nation struggling to reconcile industrial protectionism with the interests of its people. In that light, Coca-Cola becomes a kind of mirror, revealing how a decision made in the highest halls of power can ripple all the way down to individual American households. And when this global symbol is shaken by tariffs, it raises a sobering question. Is the American dream, where prosperity is measured in access and abundance, still intact? Ultimately, this isn't just about a soda can becoming more expensive. It's about the image of America itself, its trust, its jobs, its stability, being pushed to the brink in an era defined by uncertainty. Looking back on the turbulent journey Coca-Cola has endured, it becomes all the more clear. This isn't just a company that sells soft drinks. It's a cultural icon, a piece of collective memory, and a mirror reflecting the deeper tremors of our times. From wars and economic crises to the rapid shifts in consumer behavior, Coca-Cola has proven time and again its remarkable ability to adapt and survive. But today's challenge carries a different weight. This isn't just about managing costs, it's a battle of trust between profit and the planet, between pragmatism and cultural legacy, between political pressure and customer loyalty. The question now is, can Coca-Cola turn crisis into opportunity, reshaping its image as a resilient brand capable of standing tall in the storm? Or will it be swept away in a tide of criticism, slowly losing the luster it spent over a century building? The answer remains unwritten, but one thing is certain: even a single can of Coca-Cola can become a global battlefield, where economics, politics, and society collide with force. Perhaps what makes this story so thought-provoking is the way it reminds us just how fragile the world has become. A single policy decision, a single tariff line, can shake even the things we once believed unshakable. Coca-Cola will continue its journey, weathering the storm with the grit of a brand that has long learned to live alongside upheaval. But the rest is up to us, the consumers, the observers, and the ones who carry these stories forward. If you have thoughts on Coca-Cola's journey through the tariff storm, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analyses and powerful stories, where we explore how even the smallest details can reveal the biggest changes in our world.